Hello, my name is Giles Whitehead and I'm an artist, and one of my favourite things is to explore open-air museums because they always give me lots of ideas and inspiration. Today I'm in Sussex with my family at the Weald And Downland Museum. This museum is dedicated to the preservation of the rural architectural heritage of the South East. Now, my background is very much steeped in the heritage of rural life, so being at the Weald And Downland Museum feels like going home. Especially as one of the houses here is very much like the house I grew up in. Hay barns and wood piles, old farm machinery, it's all very familiar. My dad was a farmer in a very traditional sense, the sort of farming that I don't think really happens nowadays. Now, the first time I came to this museum was around 1980 when I was visiting my best friend from primary school who'd moved to Brighton. One of the highlights of the trip was coming here. It really has stuck in my head, and I've been back many times since. So when you arrive at this museum, it really is like stepping back in time, watching farming methods from a bygone era as if it was just an everyday event. And you meet some brilliantly enthusiastic people who know everything about bagpipes or weaving and dyeing linen, and it's fascinating to hear about those processes from the medieval and Tudor times, how natural dyes were used like woad and onion skins and oak galls, and you really start to appreciate the time and all the processes and the skill involved in creating that perfect colour. Now, this house is Bailey Farmhouse, and this is the one I mentioned. That is very much like the house I grew up in. Although when this house was reconstructed on the site, it was built in its original form as a medieval hall house. But to me, from the outside, it's very, very familiar. Although when you go in, it's different inside because our house had been modernised in Tudor times and had floors and chimneys put in. But actually there's still features inside that are familiar, like the structure of the beams. Like this, I think this is called a dragon beam. I remember some people from the local museum who came to look at our house who very enthusiastically identified our dragon beam. It's got a fireplace in the middle and staircases at either end leading up to the bedrooms, which are also quite familiar. Although I did have some wallpaper with animals holding balloons, another modernisation from the 1970s. It's interesting as well to see that the door latches are actually exactly the same as in our house, and for a long time I thought it was my dad that put the doors in and did the latches. I don't know why I thought that, but he was certainly always fixing the little leather strings when they were snapped by visitors who had no idea how they worked and generally got trapped in dark hallways. So my children are around the same age that I was when I first came here, and they absolutely love visiting because there's always some interesting activity for them, like playing some of those games that we used to play from childhood, like Conkers, and for the next few days we'll have a Conker craze back home. Or there's always lots of craft activities that they enjoy doing. And when we wander around these old houses and hear about how people lived in the past and how many children would share rooms and the generally uninviting nature of some of the bedrooms, my children really do start to appreciate what they have for around 10 minutes. Now, obviously the museum would prefer some of these buildings to have remained in their original locations. But if the choice is either destruction or moving to a new location, taking on a new building and moving it to the museum is a preferable option. And when you think, how do you move these buildings? Some of the smaller wooden structured buildings can be very carefully picked up and moved, like this plumber's workshop. But obviously if we've got stone and brick types of buildings, it becomes more challenging. So each building, before it is moved, has to be very carefully recorded. Lots of drawings, lots of photographs, and when it is dismantled, everything needs to be numbered. Well, I say everything, I think most things apart from things like the roof tiles. all being the same shape, can go back up in a different order. And sometimes you might think, oh well, it's fine, I'll remember how it goes back together. But you also have to remember that some of these buildings are put into storage for many years, and so recording and numbering is very, very important. I also find it interesting that many of the buildings are reconstructed in earlier forms. So some might have got into such a poor state of repair, or they had been altered over time, that they've lost many of their original features, or they'd become a hazard. So then becomes an opportunity to rebuild them in their earlier styles. For example, the very distinctive Market Hall building. Now I think it must be really interesting taking buildings apart, because I imagine you often find things within the walls that have been hidden away. I know that shoes are often hidden in walls to protect against evil spirits. People were very superstitious. I know I can't walk under a ladder. Although this wasn't hidden in the wall, I know my grandmother, who lived in the other half of the house, had a witch's ball hanging up in her window, which was a shiny glass ball filled with horsehair, and that she told me if witches ever tried to enter your house, they would get tangled up in this hair. One thing that I've seen found, but never found myself, are bricks and tiles that have got animal prints in them. And when dismantling buildings, such marks in time have been found. Bricks and tiles with dog, cat, even deer footprints. And inside the buildings you see lots of period pots, Tudor, medieval. They're all made by a local potter who uses local clays to recreate pots from different periods of time. And they really do help to conjure up that picture of life in the past. As well as all the buildings, there's also the surrounding countryside and woodland area to explore, where you can find out about the life of the charcoal burner, how you'd make a charcoal kiln and have to sit there on your one-legged stool for days on end, being very patient and trying not to nod off. Charcoal would have been an essential fuel for the iron working industry in the area. There's a shepherd's hut, complete with kettle and other sheep-related items, and a 17th century treadwheel for a well. So someone would have climbed inside that to turn that, to raise the water, which in its original location was 300 feet down, apparently. And here's another 17th century building, the water mill. And you can see this running and hear about grinding corn for flour. And the kids always like to have a go at the daily grind, but not for that long. Well, I'll leave you there. I hope you enjoyed this short tour of the Weald and Downland Museum.